don't trust the police anymore. My anxiety now affects all aspects of my life, and I struggle to go anywhere on my own.
What happened to me broke me. I was whipped, urinated on, and locked naked in a cupboard. I was told I was worthless and would be better off dead.
Where a police officer has been charged, convicted, and sentenced for killing one of his citizens that he's supposed to protect and serve.
Corrupt cops, once above the law, now face the ultimate punishment: life in prison. But how did they react as their freedom vanished forever? What you're about to see will restore your faith in the system. Keep watching. This is just the beginning. For years, he was a ghost, a phantom that haunted California, leaving a trail of terror, violence, and unanswered questions. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., better known as the Golden State Killer, committed at least 13 murders and 50 across California between 1974 and 1986. His crimes went unsolved for decades, becoming one of America's most notorious cold cases. DeAngelo's reign of terror began in the mid-1970s in Visalia, California. Known then as the Visalia Ransacker, he would break into homes, vandalize personal property, and steal small items. But his crimes quickly escalated. By 1976, he had moved to the Sacramento area, where he became known as the East Area. His modus operandi was chilling. He would stalk his victims, often entering their homes beforehand to unlock windows or plant ligatures. Then, in the dead of night, he would strike. DeAngelo would wake his victims with a flashlight beam and threats of violence. He often tied up male victims and stacked dishes on their backs, warning them that if he heard the dishes fall, he'd kill everyone in the house. He would then violate the female victims, sometimes repeatedly, over hours.
He preyed on people in Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova, often targeting couples. While raping the women, he would psychologically torture their husbands, tying them up and placing dishes on their back, threatening them not to move.
As fear gripped Sacramento, DeAngelo's attacks became bolder. He began targeting couples using the same tactics of binding, threats, and assaults. In 1978, he committed his first known murders, killing Brian and Katie Maggiore in Rancho Cordova. DeAngelo then moved his hunting grounds south to the Santa Barbara area, where he became known as the original Night Stalker. Here, his violence escalated further. He murdered at least 8 more people between 1979 and 1986, including couples in their homes. One of his most brutal attacks occurred in 1980 when he murdered Charlene and Lyman Smith in their Ventura County home. Charlene was violated before both were bludgeoned to death with a fireplace log. For years, investigators didn't connect these crimes. The East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker were thought to be separate offenders. It wasn't until DNA testing in 2001 that authorities realized they were dealing with a single perpetrator. The case went cold for decades. DeAngelo, a former police officer, seemed to vanish into thin air after 1986. Victims lived in fear, never knowing if their attacker would return. Families of the murdered were left without closure, their loved ones' cases unsolved. Then, in 2018, a breakthrough came. Investigators used DNA from a crime scene and uploaded it to a genealogy website. This led them to distant relatives of the killer. Through painstaking work, they narrowed their search and finally identified Joseph DeAngelo as their suspect.
A breakthrough in 2018. Law enforcement plugged DNA material taken from a crime scene into a website called GEDmatch, which compares the genealogical data of family members.
On April 24, 2018, DeAngelo was arrested in his home in Citrus Heights, California. The man who had eluded capture for over 40 years was finally in custody. DNA evidence conclusively linked him to multiple crime scenes.
On April 24, 2018, police arrested Joseph James DeAngelo.
The arrest sent shockwaves through California and the true crime community. The Golden State Killer, a boogeyman who had haunted the state for decades, now had a face, a name, and a backstory that seemed jarringly ordinary. As details of DeAngelo's life emerged, the contrast was stark. He had worked as a police officer in Exeter and Auburn, California during the 1970s. He had been married, raised 3 daughters, and lived a seemingly normal life in the same area he had once terrorized. But on August 21, 2020, the day of reckoning finally arrived. D'Angelo, now a 74-year-old man, stood in a makeshift courtroom in Sacramento State University's ballroom, converted due to the COVID-19 precautions. The air was thick with tension as survivors and family members of his victims gathered to witness justice being served. As the proceedings began, the weight of D'Angelo's crimes became evident. Prosecutor Tien Ho painted a chilling picture of the man before them.
His monikers reflect the sweeping geographical impact of his crimes: the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer.
But it was the victims' impact statements that truly brought home the horror of D'Angelo's actions. For 3 days, survivors and family members took the stand, their voices trembling with emotion as they recounted their experiences. One survivor, Chris Pedretti, who was violated by D'Angelo when she was just 15, looked him in the eye and declared,
"I was a normal 15-year-old kid. I loved going to school, having sleepovers, and going to church."
Another victim, Patty Cosper, daughter of survivor Patricia Murphy, read a statement on her mother's behalf. "May he rot in hell," Cosper spat, her voice filled with decades of pain and anger. As the statements continued, a pattern emerged. D'Angelo's victims weren't just recounting their trauma, they were reclaiming their power. Each statement seemed to chip away at the monster's facade, revealing the coward beneath. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Judge Michael Bowman prepared to deliver the sentence. The courtroom held its breath. Would the punishment fit the crime? Could any sentence truly bring justice after so many years? Judge Bowman's voice rang out, clear and firm.
Another way to state the sentence is as follows. Mr. D'Angelo is sentenced to a total of 11 life without the possibility of parole sentences, plus an additional life sentence, plus an additional 8 years.
The reaction was immediate. A collective exhale swept through the room, followed by muffled sobs and whispers. Some victims clasped hands, others nodded solemnly. The monster who had haunted their nightmares for so long was finally caged. But the most surprising reaction came from D'Angelo himself. The man who had terrorized so many, who had eluded capture for decades, now sat slumped in his wheelchair. As the judge read out his crimes, D'Angelo's face remained impassive, almost bored. It was a stark contrast to the predator he once was. Then, in a move that stunned the courtroom, D'Angelo slowly rose from his wheelchair. He turned to face the gallery, his eyes scanning the faces of those he had hurt. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally show remorse, offer an explanation, or beg for forgiveness. Instead, in a barely audible voice, he uttered just 5 words.
"I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry."
The reaction was mixed. Some saw it as a final insult, a half-hearted apology that couldn't begin to make up for the pain he'd caused. Others felt a sense of closure, finally hearing the killer acknowledge his crimes, even if only briefly. As D'Angelo was wheeled out of the courtroom to begin his life sentence, the atmosphere shifted. The monster was gone, but his legacy of pain remained. Yet there was also a sense of triumph. The survivors had faced their tormentor and emerged victorious. In the days following the sentencing, reactions continued to pour in. Law enforcement officials who had worked tirelessly on the case for years expressed relief and satisfaction. Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert called it the most prolific serial predator in California history, emphasizing the significance of the conviction. But perhaps the most poignant reactions came from the survivors themselves. Many spoke of a weight being lifted, of finally being able to close a chapter that had been left open for far too long.
No 13-year-old should have to find out what a rape kit is.
It had been all over the local news about the man they called the Visalia ransacker, who was breaking into people's houses, going through underwear drawers, and taking items of no value. I could never imagine that the man who had been stalking me and peering in my bedroom window during the previous months would end up changing my life forever.
He ate from my refrigerator and he drank 2 beers, while I lay bound and blindfolded, unclothed and freezing on the hardwood floor in front of an open door in the cold March night.
Now imagine this. It's October 12, 2019 in Fort Worth, Texas. Tatiana Jefferson, a 28-year-old black woman, is enjoying a quiet evening playing video games with her 8-year-old nephew, completely unaware that these will be her last moments.
Would we want more time? Yes. Yes, we would. But that's what the jury decided, and we're going to have to take that with us. 11 years, that's the same age as Zion. 10 months, 12 days. That's the day that it happened.
Outside, Aaron Dean, a police officer, responds to a neighbor's call about an open front door. The neighbor, James Smith, had called a non-emergency police number, concerned because he noticed Jefferson's doors were open and lights were on at an unusual hour.
Neighbor James Smith called the non-emergency police line around 2 a.m. when he noticed the home's front and side doors were open with the lights on.
Dean arrives at the scene with his partner. Instead of knocking on the front door or announcing their presence, they begin to check the perimeter of the house. This decision would prove fatal. As Dean moves around the house, he spots movement through a window. In a split second, he draws his weapon and fires a single shot. The bullet pierces through the window, striking at Tatiana Jefferson in the chest. She falls to the ground, dying in front of her young nephew. The aftermath is chaos. Dean's body camera footage reveals the crucial moments. He never identifies himself as a police officer. The entire encounter, from Dean seeing movement to firing his weapon, lasts a mere 3 seconds. Immediately after the shooting, Dean resigns from the Fort Worth Police Department. 2 days later, he's arrested and charged with murder. The case sends shockwaves through the community and ignites nationwide discussions about police use of force and racial bias in law enforcement. As more details emerge, the complexity of the case deepens. Investigators find a gun near Tatiana's body. Her family later confirms she owned the weapon legally and kept it for protection. This detail becomes a pivotal point in the upcoming trial. The case also brings attention to Dean's background. Records show he had been on the force for only 18 months. During his police academy training, he had received an unsatisfactory evaluation that noted his tunnel vision and need for improvement in stress reactions.
During the hiring process, also during that training in 2018, a supervising sergeant stated that when Dean was asked something by his training officer that he, quote, continues to avoid or ignore what's being said or asked.
In the weeks following the shooting, protests erupted across Fort Worth. Activists demand justice for Tatiana, holding vigils and marches. The case becomes a rallying cry in the broader movement against police brutality and racial injustice. The Jefferson family files a wrongful death lawsuit against the city and Dean. They argue that the Fort Worth Police Department's policies and training were inadequate, contributing to Tatiana's death. As the case moves towards trial, legal experts debate the charges. Some argue that murder is appropriate, given Dean's actions. Others contend that manslaughter might be more fitting, considering the split-second nature of the decision. The trial is delayed multiple times, first due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then because of various legal motions. Each delay adds to the tension and anticipation surrounding the case. Finally, in December 2022, more than 3 years after the shooting, Aaron Dean faces trial. The courtroom is packed as the proceedings begin, with observers eager to see how this high-profile case would unfold. Fast forward to December 2022. The tension in the air is thick as Aaron Dean finally faces trial. The prosecution paints a picture of a trigger-happy cop who acted recklessly. They argue that Dean failed to follow proper police procedure, resulting in an unnecessary death. But the defense attorney has a different story. They claim Dean acted in self-defense, believing that Tatiana was armed and posed a threat. They argue that in the heat of the moment, Dean made a split-second decision to protect himself and his partner. As the trial unfolds, shocking details emerge. Body cam footage shows Dean peering through the window, shouting, "Put your hands up, show me your hands," before firing, all in a matter of seconds.
Put your hands up! Show me your hands!
The jury watches in stunned silence as the events of that fateful night play out before their eyes. Witnesses take the stand, each adding another piece to the puzzle. Dean's former police academy instructor testifies that Dean's actions were out of line with his training. He states emphatically that officers are taught to announce their presence when conducting a wellness check. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching testimony comes from Zion Carr, Tatiana's nephew. Now 11 years old, he recounts the terrifying moments when his aunt was shot. His words paint a vivid picture of a fun night turned tragic in an instant.
She didn't point it out, she just kept it next to her, like on her side.
And where did she go with that, after she picked up the gun?
She was about to start walking to the window. I didn't hear nothing after that, I just seen her fall on the floor.
As the trial progresses, the courtroom becomes a battleground of emotions. Tatiana's family sits stoically, their pain evident in every line of their faces. Dean, on the other hand, remains impassive, his expression unreadable as he listens to the testimony against him. The prosecution hammers home their point. Dean's actions were not just a mistake, but a criminal act. They argue that his failure to identify himself as police and his quick decision to shoot were grossly negligent. The defense counters, reminding the jury of the split-second decisions officers must make in potentially dangerous situations. They argue that Dean believed he was facing an armed suspect and acted to protect himself and others. After days of testimony, it's time for closing arguments. The air in the courtroom is electric as both sides make their final plea to the jury. The prosecution urges them to hold Dean accountable, to show that no one, not even a police officer, is above the law. The defense implores them to consider the pressures and dangers of police work, asking for understanding and leniency. As the jury files out to deliberate, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Hours tick by, stretching into days. The wait is excruciating for both sides. Finally, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom holds its collective breath as the judge asks Dean to stand. The tension is noticeable as the verdict is read. In a moment that would echo across the nation,
Aaron York deemed guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of manslaughter, assessed his punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 11 years, 10 months, 12 days.
Next, David Carrick, a name that once commanded respect, now sends shivers down spines. For 2 decades, this Metropolitan police officer led a double life.
This is the allegation that's been made to us, okay, sir?
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
So I've only been a police officer for 20 years.
And in many ways, this is a story of the strength of 12 women. When this arrest made the news in 2021, those impacted started to come forward.
By day, he wore a badge. By night, he was a predator. His story is a stark reminder that monsters can hide in plain sight, even behind a uniform. Carrick joined the Met Police in 2001 after a stint in the Army. He seemed like the perfect candidate, disciplined, dedicated, and eager to serve. Little did anyone know, this was the beginning of a reign of terror that would span nearly 2 decades. His first known offense dates back to 2003. Over the next 17 years, Carrick would go on to commit a series of horrific crimes against at least 12 women. His methods were consistent and cruel. He'd meet women on dating apps or in bars, using his status as a police officer to gain their trust. One victim recalled how Carrick bragged about guarding Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Another remembered him showing off his warrant card on their first date. These weren't just pickup lines. They were calculated moves to lower his victims' defenses. Once alone with his victims, Carrick's true nature emerged. He'd become controlling and violent. Women reported being locked in small cupboards under the stairs for hours. Some were urinated on, beaten, and assaulted. One victim was attacked with an adult toy so violently she had to seek medical attention. Carrick's crimes weren't limited to physical abuse. He employed psychological tactics too. He'd tell his victims they were worthless, that no one would believe them over a police officer. He isolated them from friends and family, controlled their finances, and monitored their movements. In one particularly harrowing incident, Carrick held a gun to a woman's head. The message was clear. He had the power of life and death over her. Despite the severity and frequency of his crimes, Carrick managed to evade justice for years. How? The answer lies in a toxic mix of institutional failings and the power of the badge he carried. Between 2000 and 2021, Carrick was the subject of multiple complaints. There were accusations of domestic violence, harassment, and assault. Yet, time and again, he faced no serious consequences. Internal investigations were dropped. Criminal complaints didn't make it to court.
He was accused of harassing an ex-partner. No action was taken. Over the next 6 years, he raped several women.
In 2021, everything changed. A woman came forward with an allegation against Carrick. This time, the complaint stuck. As news of his arrest spread, more victims found the courage to speak out. The floodgates opened, and the true extent of Carrick's crimes began to emerge. The investigation that followed uncovered a pattern of behavior so shocking it sent shockwaves through the entire Metropolitan Police Force. Detectives pieced together a timeline of abuse spanning nearly 2 decades. The sheer scale of Carrick's offenses was staggering. As the case built against him, disturbing details about Carrick's personality came to light. Colleagues described him as cocky and a womanizer. He was known to brag about his sexual conquests, often in degrading terms. In retrospect, these were red flags that had been ignored for far too long. The investigation also revealed Carrick's fascination with weaponry. Beyond his service firearm, he owned a collection of legally held guns. This arsenal added an extra layer of intimidation to his interactions with victims. By the time the case reached court, the evidence against Carrick was overwhelming. DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and digital footprints all pointed to his guilt. The man who had hidden behind his badge for so long was finally exposed. Now let's rewind to January 2023. Carrick stands in the dock at London's Southwark Crown Court. The air is thick with tension. Victims, their families, and fellow officers pack the room. As the charges are read, gasps echo through the courtroom. Each count feels like a punch to the gut for those present. 49 charges, 24 rapes. Crimes spanning 17 years. Each detail is more horrifying than the last. Carrick used his position to gain trust, then shattered it in the worst ways possible. The courtroom listens in stunned silence as the prosecutor outlines a pattern of behavior so twisted, it's hard to comprehend. But how did he evade justice for so long? That's where this case gets even darker. Carrick's job as a firearms officer in an elite unit gave him a shield of authority. He wasn't just any cop. He was part of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. This prestigious position allowed him to brush off complaints and intimidate victims. As the prosecutor speaks, eyes dart between Carrick and the judge. The former officer stands motionless, his face a mask of indifference. But the courtroom? It's a powder keg of emotions. Anger, disgust, and a deep sense of betrayal fill the air. Victims' impact statements cut through the silence. Words like monster and pure evil hang in the air. One survivor describes feeling worthless. Another speaks of nightmares that never end. A third recounts how Carrick's actions destroyed her faith in the police, the very institution meant to protect her.
I don't trust the police anymore. My anxiety now affects all aspects of my life, and I struggle to go anywhere on my own.
What happened to me broke me. I was whipped, urinated on, and locked naked in a cupboard. I was told I was worthless and would be better off dead.
The weight of their pain is obvious. Some in the courtroom weep openly. Others clench their fists, barely containing their rage. The collective trauma in the room is overwhelming, a testament to the far-reaching impact of Carrick's crimes.
Before we begin, Alice's hands tremble. This is so hard for her, but she's clear about why she's sharing her story.
I didn't want to be known as a rape victim.
Then, a twist. Carrick's own lawyer paints a picture of a broken man, claiming childhood trauma led to his crimes. The courtroom bristles. Is this an explanation or an excuse? The defense argues that Carrick's upbringing in an abusive household warped his view of relationships. They point to his alcoholism and depression as mitigating factors. But for many, these arguments fall flat. The prosecution quickly counters, reminding the court of Carrick's calculated behavior. This wasn't a man out of control, they argue, but one who carefully selected his victims and used his position to silence them. As the judge prepares to deliver the sentence, the atmosphere shifts. This moment, years in the making, will determine if justice truly prevails. The words come like hammer blows.
This makes a total of 36 life sentences. The minimum term you will have to serve before the parole board can think of releasing you is 30 years, 239 days.
But the story doesn't end here. As Carrick is led away, whispers start. How many others like him are still out there? How deep does this problem go in the police force? The case has exposed serious flaws in the vetting process for police officers. Carrick had faced multiple complaints over the years, yet remained on the force. This revelation sends shockwaves through the criminal justice system. Calls for reform echo beyond the courtroom walls.
He was vetted again and passed. In 2019, he allegedly assaulted a woman in Hertfordshire. He got a mild reprimand and the matter was dropped.
In the days following the sentencing, public outrage grows. Protests erupt outside police stations. Demands for accountability reach fever pitch. The Met Police, already under scrutiny, faces a crisis of confidence.
We can't rely on the police to protect us from violence against women, which is one of the most prevalent crimes in our society.
Political leaders weigh in, promising investigations and changes. But for many, these words ring hollow. The damage to public trust is deep and may take years to repair.
All I can say is, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we've let you down.
The media frenzy surrounding the case brings other victims forward. Women who had stayed silent, fearing they wouldn't be believed, now find the courage to speak out. It becomes clear that Carrick's case, as horrifying as it is, might just be the tip of the iceberg. Support groups for victims of police abuse see a surge in calls. Mental health professionals warn of the long-lasting impact on not just Carrick's direct victims, but on public perception of law enforcement as a whole. Legal experts begin to re-examine old cases, looking for signs of similar abuse of power. The ripple effects of Carrick's crimes spread far and wide, touching every corner of the criminal justice system. As the dust settles, attention turns to prevention. How can we stop another David Carrick? Proposals range from enhanced psychological screening for officers to independent oversight committees. But implementing these changes proves challenging, met with resistance from some within the police force itself. The case also sparks a broader conversation about power dynamics and consent. Schools and universities update their curricula, emphasizing the importance of healthy relationships and recognizing abuse. While the sentencing brings some closure, the road to healing stretches out before them. Support services scramble to meet the increased demand, highlighting the need for long-term care for survivors of sexual assault. In the aftermath of the trial, a new normal emerges. Citizens eye their local police with newfound suspicion. Officers report feeling under constant scrutiny, their every action questioned. The trust between law enforcement and the public, once taken for granted, now hangs by a thread. The courtroom may be empty, but the fallout is just beginning. Carrick's case has blown the lid off a Pandora's box of police misconduct, leaving us with unsettling questions. If we can't trust those sworn to protect us, who can we trust? How many more David Carricks are lurking behind badges, waiting to be exposed? And speaking of exposure, Eric DeValkenier's case only deepens the cracks in the system.
Eric DeValkenier is not Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Eric DeValkenier is not one of the 3 men in Georgia convicted of running down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
A single gunshot echoes through a Kansas City backyard. In seconds, a life is snuffed out. But this isn't your typical crime scene. The man holding the smoking gun? A decorated police detective. The victim? An unarmed civilian. What happens when the thin blue line shatters and a cop becomes the killer? Today, we dive deep into the case that rocked Kansas City and sparked a national debate on police accountability. December 3rd, 2019. A quiet neighborhood in Kansas City, Missouri. The air is crisp, and the streets are calm, but that calm is about to be shattered. Detective Eric DeValkenier and his partner are in hot pursuit of a red pickup truck. The driver, Cameron Lamb, pulls into his own backyard. What happens next will change lives forever and ignite a firestorm of controversy. DeValkenier claims he saw Lamb point a gun at his partner.
Pulling up to defendant's house, Sergeant Schwam pulling into the driveway, immediately getting out with his weapon drawn, rapidly moving into the backyard, carport, garage area of the house, and defendant doing the same.
In a split-second decision, he fires. 2 shots ring out, cutting through the winter air. Lamb slumps over the steering wheel, fatally wounded. But as investigators comb the scene, questions start to pile up. Where's the gun Lamb had allegedly pointed? The crime scene tells a different story than the one DeValkenier is spinning. Let's rewind a bit. Who was Cameron Lamb? A 26-year-old father of 3, Lamb was known to his friends and family as a devoted dad who loved working on cars. He had his struggles, sure, but who doesn't? On that fateful day, he was just pulling into his own backyard. Now, he'll never walk out of it again. And DeValkenier? A seasoned detective with years on the force, decorated, respected, trusted to uphold the law. But on that December day, did he cross a line that can never be uncrossed? Months pass, investigations are conducted. Finally, in June 2020, DeValkenier was charged with involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action. It's a rare move. Police officers are seldom charged for on-duty shootings. The thin blue line holds firm, usually, but not this time. Fast forward to November 2021. The courtroom is packed, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge J. Dale Youngs delivers his verdict. DeValkenier is found guilty on both counts. The judge's words cut through the silence. It's a bombshell. A serving police officer convicted for an on-duty shooting.
Where a police officer has been charged, convicted, and sentenced for killing one of his citizens that he's supposed to protect and serve.
But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a new chapter in this twisted tale. March 4th, 2022, sentencing day. The air is electric with anticipation. Lamb's family fills one side of the courtroom, their faces a mix of grief and hope for justice. On the other side, DeValkenier's supporters, including fellow officers, sit in stoic silence. As DeValkenier sits before the judge, his face is a mask of composure, but beneath that calm exterior, what thoughts race through his mind? Is he replaying that fateful day in December? The sound of the gunshots? The sight of Lamb slumped over the wheel? Or is he already imagining the long years ahead, trapped behind bars, a cop among cons? Judge Youngs doesn't mince words. He sentences DeValkenir to 3 years for involuntary manslaughter and 6 years for armed criminal action. The sentences will run consecutively.
Eric DeValkenir, on count 1, the Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years. On the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, I sentence you to a term of incarceration of 6 years.
But wait, there's more. In a twist that sends shockwaves through the room, Judge Young suspends the execution of the sentence. Instead, he placed DeValkenir on probation for 3 years. The fallen detective avoids prison time, for now. The room explodes in chaos. What just happened?
A date for sentencing will be determined after further consultation with counsel. The court will order the preparation of a sentencing assessment report. If the defendant chooses to file a motion for new trial, his deadline for doing so is extended 10 days. I will order the defendant remain free on bond pending sentencing. That will be the court's order. Counsel will withdraw their exhibits. Eric DeValkenir is not Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Eric DeValkenir is not one of the 3 men in Georgia convicted of running down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
The reaction is immediate and intense. Lamb's family is stunned, their hopes for justice dashed in an instant. They'd hoped for a harsher sentence, a clear message that no one is above the law. Lori Bay, Lamb's mother, speaks outside the courthouse, her voice trembling with emotion.
This has been just a hurtful tragedy for our family, and the healing is just not there yet.
On the other side, DeValkenir supporters breathe a collective sigh of relief. To them, he's a dedicated officer who made a split-second decision in a high-pressure situation. They argue that the punishment doesn't fit the circumstances. He was just doing his job. As DeValkenir leaves the courthouse, a free man for now, the debate rages on. His case becomes a lightning rod for discussions about power and justice in America. Some see it as a rare instance of a police officer being held accountable. Others view it as an overcorrection, a sacrificial lamb to appease public anger. But amidst the heated arguments and media frenzy, let's not forget the human cost. Cameron Lamb, a 26-year-old father of 3, will never return home. His children will grow up without their father. His mother will never hear his laugh again. And Eric DeValkenir, once a respected detective, now bears the weight of a man's death on his conscience. The case raises difficult questions. How can we ensure that police officers can do their jobs effectively while also protecting citizens from excessive force? And when tragedy strikes, how do we determine a just punishment? Police departments across the country are watching closely, reevaluating their use of force policies. Activists are using the case as a rallying cry for further reforms. And what of DeValkenir himself? As he begins his probation, he's a man caught between 2 worlds. No longer a cop, not quite a convict. His career in law enforcement is over, his reputation in tatters. But he's not behind bars. Is this justice? The answer depends on who you ask. The case also shines a spotlight on the role of police unions. Throughout the trial and sentencing, the local police union stood firmly behind DeValkenir. As the dust settles on this explosive case, questions linger. Will DeValkenir's probation stand, or will he eventually serve time? How will this verdict impact policing in Kansas City and beyond? And in the end, can justice ever truly be served when a life is lost? Amber Geiger, a former police officer, mistakenly entered the wrong apartment, only to find 26-year-old Botham Jean inside. What followed would trigger a wave of controversy.
I'm an off-duty officer. I thought it was in my apartment, and I shot a guy thinking it was my apartment.
Amber Geiger, a police officer with the Dallas Police Department, lived in a 4-story apartment complex located 2 blocks northwest of her police headquarters in the Cedars district of South Dallas. The floor plans at the complex were identical on every floor, making navigation within the building challenging. On September 6, 2018, Amber Geiger left work after her 13.5-hour shift as a patrol officer around 9:30 p.m. As she was driving home, she engaged in a conversation with her partner. She was armed with her handgun during this time, but her body camera was not turned on. Upon arriving at her apartment complex, Amber failed to notice that she had taken the wrong floor. As Amber attempted to enter what she thought was her apartment, she saw the door was ajar, thinking it was an intruder. Amber drew her weapon and entered the apartment. Once inside, Amber encountered Botham Jean in his living room, eating ice cream. In a tragic turn of events, Amber shot and killed Botham, striking him twice in the chest. Amber Geiger called 911 to report the shooting.
Get up, man.
Dallas 911, this is Carla. Where's your emergency?
Hi, this is off-duty officer. I need EMS. I'm inside the apartment with him. Hey, come on.
What's your name?
I'm Amber Geiger. I need to get me, I'm in...
Okay, we have help on the way.
I know, but I'm gonna lose my job.
Botham John was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries and died. 3 days later, Amber was arrested and charged with manslaughter. However, the charge was later upgraded to murder following further investigation. In the aftermath of the shooting, Amber was placed on administrative leave by the Dallas Police Department. However, on September 24, 2018, she was fired. The firing resulted from her violation of department policies regarding the use of force and entry without consent.
But there is much more to be done by the city of Dallas.
Amber Geiger's trial began on September 23, 2019. She took the stand in her own defense, recounting the events that led to her shooting of Botham John and testifying that she feared for her life and thought Botham John was an intruder in her apartment. Both the prosecution and defense presented expert witnesses who testified about the use of force, split-second decision-making, and self-defense. After deliberating for about an hour, the jury returned with a guilty verdict against Amber Geiger on October 1, 2019. The following day, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in Botham's murder. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Botham John's mother, Allison John, provided an emotional testimony, sharing the impact her son's death had on her life and her family. Botham's younger brother, Brant John, also took the stand, expressing his forgiveness for Amber and even hugging her in the courtroom. Although Botham's father did forgive Amber, he wanted her to be stiffer.
Somebody told her that Botham was shot and that he died. My life has not been the same. It's just been like a roller coaster. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. It's just been the most terrible time for me.
But I love you just like anyone else. I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail.
Amber Geiger's appeal has been denied, which means that her sentence will stand as decided by the courts. She is still eligible for release as early as September 2024. On the other hand, her full sentence will continue to run until September 2029. The Amber Geiger trial sparked conversations and debates about racial profiling, police brutality, and criminal justice in the United States. Critics argued that Amber's conviction was a rare example of accountability in a system that often favors officers in use of force cases. Supporters of Amber expressed concerns about the potential for vigilantism if officers were discouraged from exercising their right to defend themselves. Whereas some argue Amber Geiger killed Botham John accidentally, there is no doubting that Michael Dotro's actions were driven by pure hatred.
The sentence to be imposed in this particular case is because Mr. Dotro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we can possibly expect from someone in our society.
Michael Dotro, a police officer, harbored deep resentment towards his superior deputy chief, Mark Anderco. He was frustrated by the chief's decision to rearrange his shift times and order him to undergo an evaluation with a clinical psychologist, following the 11th excessive force complaint against him. In retaliation, Michael Dotro decided to take matters into his own hands. Late at night, as Mark Anderco and his family slept peacefully in their home, Michael Dotro carried out a chilling act of violence. Michael intentionally firebombed Mark's home, causing extensive damage to the property. Miraculously, everyone managed to escape alive, narrowly avoiding what could have been a tragic loss of life. Michael Dotro was arrested and taken into custody, facing an array of criminal charges. He had been accused of cyberbullying a woman who worked in the police department, slashing her tires, using the department's computer to access information illegally, and possessing marijuana and paraphernalia in his police bag. Furthermore, it was discovered that Michael had prohibited weapons in his possession, including a blackjack and brass knuckles. The prosecutor at Michael Dotro's trial delivered a powerful opening statement, calling the defendant's actions a disgrace to the oath he took as a police officer. According to the prosecution, during the hearing, Michael showed no remorse and offered no apology to his former superior, Mark Anderko, whose entire family was victimized. During the sentencing hearing, the judge handed down a stringent punishment. Michael was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and 10 years in prison for aggravated arson. Additionally, he received 10 years for official misconduct, 5 years for conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and 18 months for conspiracy to retaliate. These sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning Michael would first serve 17 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, Michael was ordered to serve 5 years probation upon his release. One day in his sentencing hearing, Michael's wife made a shocking statement to the courtroom. She referred to Michael as a manipulative monster before a sheriff officer instructed her to be quiet. When it comes to dirty cops, there's no doubt Michael Dotro is one of the worst of the worst. While he never killed anyone, the same can't be said about Kenneth Blue.
Blue is charged on 4 counts, including first-degree premeditated murder in the strangulation death of Jenny Webb, the Bridgeport woman bearing his unborn child.
In 2012, Jennifer Webb, a 30-year-old administrative assistant from Michigan, made an exciting discovery. She was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and anticipation, especially when the sonogram test revealed that she was going to have a little boy. Jennifer promptly shared her happiness with her mother, calling her in tears to announce her plans to name her unborn son James or Braxton. Despite the joyous news, Jennifer's pregnancy faced one important challenge. The father of the child was not involved, and she had concerns about whether she had shared the news with his wife. Jennifer believed it was crucial for the baby's birth certificate to include the birth father's name, and she felt the man's wife ought to know beforehand. Wanting to address these concerns, Jennifer planned to meet with the baby's father on the evening of August 30th. That night, Jennifer was annoyed by the impending meeting. However, she ultimately decided to go anyway, a decision that would change her life forever. At around midnight, 2 police officers with the Buena Vista Township Police Department, one of them being Kenneth Blue, stumbled upon a gruesome discovery. As they approached the rural dead-end road, they found Jennifer lying on the ground. Upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a peculiar sight. A long cord was attached to the roof rack of Jennifer's car and extended down the ditch to where her body lay. Even more chilling was the fact that the cord was wrapped tightly around her neck. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the detectives wasted no time launching an investigation. They quickly secured the crime scene and began searching for clues that could shed light on what happened to Jennifer. One of the detectives stumbled upon a note written by Jennifer. The note revealed her thoughts on taking her own life. It stated that she had struggled with the idea of being pregnant for several months and had finally admitted to herself that she was not okay with the situation. When the detectives questioned Jennifer's mother, she dropped a bombshell. The father of Jennifer's baby was Kenneth Blue, one of the police officers who found Jennifer's body. This revelation sparked a chain of events that led the detectives to uncover new details about the case. As the investigation continued, the detectives stumbled upon messages between Jennifer and Kenneth Blue on Jennifer's cell phone. These messages provided further insight into their relationship and revealed their intimate connection. Moreover, when they examined Jennifer's call log, the detectives noticed the last person she had contact with was Kenneth. In order to determine the manner of Jennifer's death, a forensic pathologist was called in. The pathologist's findings contradicted the initial assumption that an extension cord strangled Jennifer. Instead, the pathologist determined that Jennifer may have been placed in a chokehold from behind and died as a result of neck compression.
She died of the suffocation. We call it chokehold.
This new information cast doubt on the initial crime scene analysis, indicating that the death may not have been as straightforward as initially thought. During an interview with Kenneth Blue, the detectives noticed several injuries on the officer's body. There were noticeable injuries to his eye, forearm, and index finger. When the DNA results of the paternity of Jennifer's unborn baby confirmed the father was Officer Kenneth Blue, the detectives wasted no time in arresting him and charging him with Jennifer and her unborn son's murder. In 2012, Kenneth Blue went on trial and was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Additionally, he was given an extra 65 to 100-year sentence for the death of his unborn son. During Jennifer's mother's victim impact statement, she had the opportunity to address Kenneth Blue directly. With a mix of anger and sadness, she said,
"Go to your cage and think about how you squeezed the life and breath out of my daughter and grandson, and I hope it haunts you every day for the rest of your life.
It is unimaginable to think that a father and New York City police officer could ever abuse their young son so badly that it would ultimately result in the child's death. However, that is exactly what Officer Michael Valva did.
The slight boy with hazel eyes who loved school was beaten and starved.
Thomas lived as a prisoner, given a death sentence that was executed. While this defendant will have a cell with a bed and a blanket and a pillow and heat.
In 2022, a Long Island, New York jury convicted a former New York City police officer with the second-degree murder of his 8-year-old autistic son, Thomas Valva. During the trial, it was revealed that the principal and teachers of Thomas Elementary School, where Thomas attended 3rd grade, had made over 24 calls to Child Protective Services in the 3 years before the child's death. Testimony during the trial revealed that Thomas's teachers had repeatedly raised concerns about his physical well-being. They testified that on several occasions, Thomas and his brothers arrived at school covered in bruises. The extent of the injuries raised concerns among staff members, who suspected that the children were being abused. Furthermore, several school staff members described instances where they witnessed Thomas eating crumbs off the floor and out of the trash. Additionally, it came to light that Thomas wore pull-ups all day, despite being 8 years old, which was made due to his incontinence, believed to be caused by the stress of not using the bathroom for long periods while at home. According to the prosecution, Michael Valva abused his son for several years before January 17, 2020, when Thomas ultimately went into cardiac arrest and died due to hypothermia. On the night of January 17th, Thomas and his brother, also autistic, were locked in the garage at their Long Island home. The garage lacked proper insulation and was unheated, making it extremely cold. At around 8 a.m., Thomas, confined to the freezing garage, soiled himself. Based on security camera footage and audio records, Michael Valva can be heard telling his fiancée, Angela Polina, to make the 8-year-old boy eat his feces. Michael Valva verbally berated Thomas, cursing him for soiling his pants before school. He ordered Thomas to strip down so he could hose him off in the yard before school with cold water. One of the Valva family's neighbors' security camera footage caught Thomas losing his balance and falling, hitting his head as he walked down an icy path after Michael hosed him off in the yard. Minutes after the fall, at around 8:50 a.m., Michael Valva took his son back to the garage. The recordings revealed alarming statements by Michael to his fiancée. He can be heard stating that Thomas was catatonic and needed help. Michael then proceeded to slap his son repeatedly, yelling, "Wake up! Are you alive?" The security cameras captured these actions. Despite witnessing his son's condition, Michael did not seek immediate medical attention. Instead, he tried to wake Thomas, who was unresponsive. After failing to revive his son through a warm bath, Michael Valva finally made the call at 9:40 a.m. to report Thomas's condition. The ambulance arrived promptly and transported Thomas to the hospital. However, Thomas's condition continued to deteriorate, and upon his arrival, his temperature was only 76.1 degrees. Tragically, less than 1 hour later, Thomas passed away. The medical reports revealed severe hypothermia, which experts believe was caused by prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. Michael Valva's actions were deemed reprehensible, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
I just can't, and I did not want my son to die.
Come here today and see an end to it.
We wanted to make sure that this man got the absolute biggest sentence he could under the law.
During Michael Valva's trial, the prosecution showed extensive surveillance footage from inside the home, and the prosecutors asserted Thomas and his brother had been abused for years. The Suffolk County District Attorney who tried the case referred to it as heartbreaking and one of the toughest cases he has experienced in his 30 years as a prosecutor. Several staff members from Thomas's elementary school testified to the conditions they witnessed Thomas come to school in. Up next is a chilling case involving a carefully orchestrated plan from none other than Jeffrey Moreland.
Several people took the stand today, including Kara Jo Roberts' husband and the detective who described to the jury the red flags that he knew pointed to murder.
On November 5, 2008, Kara Jo Roberts, a happily married woman with 2 children, was discovered fatally shot in her home. The scene was gruesome, as Kara had been assaulted before her murder. Her killer had meticulously planned the killing, leaving Kara's body in the bathtub with the water running. An investigation into Kara's murder was swiftly launched. but the case soon became a cold one. The police, fearing there was a serial killer stalking the streets, grew concerned that the person who murdered Carol would strike again. Their fears were justified as 2 years later, in October 2010, another heinous crime occurred. In October 2010, Paige Huser went to check on her 75-year-old mother, Nina Whitley, after not hearing from her for a while. When Paige entered her mother's home, she found Nina dead at the bottom of the stairs. Initially, Paige believed that her mother must have died from a heart attack and accidentally fallen down the stairs. However, upon the arrival of the police and upon turning Nina's body over, it was evident that her death was not of natural causes. Nina had sustained several stab wounds to her chest, and there were indications that she had been assaulted. Police officers began canvassing the neighborhood where Nina lived, seeking any clues or witness accounts that might help them identify the killer. One resident who had seen a white male in his 50s walking with a limp and driving a black Jeep near Nina's house on the day of her murder provided valuable information to the police. This witness was able to give a detailed description of the man, which assisted the police sketch artist in creating a likeness of the suspect. DNA evidence recovered from Nina's body was sent to the crime lab for analysis. Although detectives failed to find a suspect, the DNA did match the DNA found at the crime scene of Cara Jo Roberts in 2008. Initially, Nina's daughter, Paige, did not recognize the suspect in the composite sketch. However, one day, while passing by a billboard displaying the police sketch, Paige's recognition hit her. The person depicted in the sketch was none other than her former boyfriend, Jeffrey Moreland. Paige and Jeffrey dated for 3 years after meeting in a criminal justice course in college, but their relationship ended in 1987. Since their breakup, Jeffrey pursued a career in law enforcement. He became a police officer and eventually retired in 2005. The detectives quickly realized the significance of Paige's revelation and began investigating Jeffrey Moreland as a suspect in Nina's murder. One of the key discoveries they made was that Jeffrey owned a black Jeep, the same color as the vehicle driven by the suspect at the time of the crime. This evidence further solidified their suspicions and prompted them to seek a DNA sample from Jeffrey himself. Jeffrey seemed reluctant to provide a DNA sample, delaying the request from the detectives. However, as the investigation progressed, Jeffrey found himself facing allegations of sexual assault. This turn of events provided an opportunity for the detectives to obtain Jeffrey's DNA through other means. Once the DNA was analyzed, it was found to match the unknown male DNA found at both Nina Whitney's and Cara Jo Roberts' crime scenes. This development strengthened the case against Jeffrey Moreland, as it provided a direct link between him and both the murders. Jeffrey Moreland was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and sexual assault. He faced trial and was ultimately found guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it is clear Jeffrey Moreland is a police officer and a cold-blooded murderer, the next case isn't quite so clear-cut. Is former California Highway Patrol officer Tamika Johnson a victim of domestic violence or a callous murderer?
That CHP officer is behind bars charged with murdering her husband.
Tamika Johnson, a California Highway Patrol officer, found herself in a tragic situation in February 2009 when she shot and killed her husband, Marcus Lemons, while on a freeway exit ramp. After the shooting, Tamika drove to her parents' home with Marcus's body in the front seat of her car. When questioned by detectives, Tamika provided them with a detailed account of what led to the incident. According to Tamika, she and her husband started their night out at TGI Fridays, but an argument soon erupted. Tamika stated that she took the car keys and started to drive home, attempting to ignore the escalating tensions between her and Marcus. However, Marcus became enraged when she ignored him, grabbing her neck. Tamika claimed she pulled over on the freeway, hoping to calm down and defuse the situation. However, the struggle continued as Marcus took the keys out of the ignition, and a fight over Tamika's purse ensued. Tamika believed that Marcus was going for the gun she carried in her bag, and in self-defense, she managed to get hold of the weapon and shoot Marcus. However, after a thorough investigation, the detectives came to the conclusion that Tamika's story was not one of self-defense. Instead, they suspected it was cold-blooded murder. 2 years after her husband's death, Tamika Johnson was arrested and charged with murder. She pleaded not guilty and was held on a $2 million bail as she awaited trial. Due to her arrest, Tamika was placed on administrative leave without pay from her position as a California Highway Patrol officer. During Tamika's trial, her defense attorneys attempted to present her as a victim of domestic violence, not as someone who committed a callous act of murder. However, the prosecution countered these claims by presenting evidence that Tamika had exhibited aggressive tendencies and a tendency to drink excessively. Additionally, the prosecution painted the victim, Marcus, as a kind and peaceful man. Tamika took the witness stand to testify in her defense, but her statements did little to sway the jury. The jury ultimately found her guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to 50 years to life in prison. After the verdict was read, Tamika slid out of her chair behind the defense table and onto the floor. She was handcuffed to a gurney rail by her left wrist and removed from the courtroom as her family wailed and sobbed. These cases have ripped open a Pandora's box of police misconduct, shaking trust in law enforcement like never before. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned for the shocking revelations in our next video.